Well, hello. Welcome to the Creative Writing Live podcast, where we talk with writers from all mediums and genres about themselves, their work, and advice they have for writers. I'm your host, Paul Zeidman, and my guest today is screenwriter Jonathon E. Stewart, but he says you can call him John Stewart, and we discussed before we started, not that John Stewart. John is a screenwriter, best known for Pixar Disney's Cars 3 and the 2020 Scooby-Doo reboot Scoob, which I have a couple of questions about. Is your writing partners, is it Ayal?
It's Al. It's an Israeli name. Yep.
Okay, Eyal Rapodel Stewart has written four. Look, this is a long list. DreamWorks, Universal, Warner Brothers, Paramount, ABC Studios, STX, Paramount Animation, Sony Animation, Fox Animation, there's a trend here, Netflix Animation, and he also served on Pixar's Brain Trust from the years 2013 to 2014. Jonathon Stewart, welcome to the Creative Writing Life podcast.
Thank you so much. It's good to be here, Paul. I appreciate it.
Oh, my pleasure. It's great to have you here. I've got a lot to talk about today. John has also been very active on social media, so we're definitely going to get into that. But as regular listeners and viewers of the show are familiar, we like to start things off. We talk about things we may have read or watched lately. Did we like it? Did we hate it? We're kind of like, I don't need to see that again. I'll go first just to give you a few minutes to gather your thoughts. Last week, I had the pleasure of seeing my local art house theater because I'm in San Francisco, and they have a series called The Streets of San Francisco. It's movies pretty much from the 20th century that take place in San Francisco, and this one was from 1958, and it's called The Lineup, and it's kind of a noir about smugglers. Who are smuggling heroin into San Francisco, and it's up to the cops to try and find them because they're smuggling the heroin in through in through devious means. And so like one is it's hidden in a statue from Hong Kong, and another one is it was in a doll from Japan, and it's about them tracking it down. And Eli Wallach is one of the hitmen who's trying to track down all the heroin before the cops get a hang of it. And it was a great story to begin with, but also because I live here, and so it was really cool to see all of these locations that some of them are still there and some of them totally different. Like there used to be this freeway along the bay side of the city. That's not there anymore. This is when they were still building it, so that was really
Uh,
cool. And like stuff in the Presidio, the park slash former army base here, driving through that, and kind of like, oh my gosh, that's the neighborhood that I live in, and that kind of stuff. So it was just a lot of fun, but it was just really cool, and just to get it to see it on the big screen, that was a big kick as well. So John, what about you?
I was going to say I love movies, and I always have loved movies about Los Angeles that show various aspects of the city, and often in a sort of continuity that is ridiculous or doesn't exist at all in the real realm of time and space. And my kids actually now really enjoy it too. It's like, oh my God, there's that, or there's that from the 80s, or you know what I mean? So I hear you. That's a very fun thing. The most recent thing I've seen on the big screen was Deadpool and Wolverine, which I loved. I thought it was. I'm not even a Marvel guy. Like I'm not a. I mean, I've seen most of them, but I'm not generally a huge mega Marvel fan. But I really enjoyed Deadpool and Wolverine. I thought. I mean, I've always thought both of those characters are, like many people's, are two of my favorites as well. And I was like, how are they going to bring this together? How's it going to make any sense in the world without feeling completely contrived? And man, they pulled it off. It was really good, really entertaining. I think I did some comment about it online too, but just a really, really good two-hander in the best of senses. And from the comedy to the action to the premise, it was an A plus. It deserves all the accolades that it's getting for sure.
That is fantastic. Okay. So Jonathon E. Stewart, let's talk a little bit about you. So what is your background as a writer? I mean, were you the type, you were always writing as a kid, or did you kind of stumble into it a little later in life?
Yeah, no, good question. When I was a kid, I think I always sort of had a knack for writing, like way back to pretty young, like, as early as like fifth grade, I can remember writing, you know, plays that were a little aspirational for the age at the time. And, that sort of continued organically through high school. I had a really good composition teacher in 10th grade. And so I think I learned a lot about, more formal writing that year. And I also got into journalism at the same time and ended up running the school newspaper for a year. And That was that was all a big formative part of, I think, my writing and learning how to write in different styles, from the essay style of this composition class to journalism, which is, the reverse pyramid and being concise and telling a story quickly and easily. And um, so by the time I got to college, I took a couple other really important formative courses. One was an education one, which again was just about a different format of writing. I remember the assignments were really crazy. It was like you had to do it in one page, and nobody could do it in one page because everybody was used to writing 10 pages, of an essay. So I think those are some of my early formative writing things that, you know, proved to be helpful as I, eventually came out to LA and wanted to be a screenwriter and figuring out that whole format of writing, which is again, unlike anything else, as we know. But alongside all of that, I have always been a movie fan. Like I'm an only child, like movies were formative experiences for me in many different ways. They kept me entertained in many different ways and were sort of my windows into the way people exist in the world. And so I've always had this love of movies, and it was, somewhere late in college where I was trying to figure out what I was going to do with my life, and having stumbled into a couple of, film production classes where I was like, you know what, I am going to move to LA and try to figure out how to make movies. And that began my writing adventure.
I was going to say that must begun a life of toil and drudgery.
Yeah, exactly. And then the torture began.
Hmm.
Yeah, no, I think it actually took me it took me a good 5 or 10 years out here to really understand how um, to just manipulate the format, to really get under the hood and understand what was happening structure wise with things, how to build good characters, how to make sure that, emotions are earned and real and such that you feel them as the audience. That it's all those things are really they're hard to teach and they're hard to learn. And I think a lot of it only comes by a lot of practice and just keeping at it. It really, keeping your nose on the grindstone, like you said.
Yeah. So that being said, so like what was it that what was the script or scripts that kind of helped you get in? Because everyone says, well, it wasn't just this one thing, but for some writers it is like, oh, I wrote this script and this producer liked it.
Yeah, it was for us. It was one script, and it was one script after having, so my writing partner and I go all the way back to college. So I've known him for a really long time. But it was not until, I guess, 2006 or so that we actually paired up together and started writing stuff together. And the very first thing we wrote was a biopic about Frank Lloyd Wright and a
Oh.
protege of his who was my writing partner's great uncle. So it was a very personal story to him, and it was a really great movie actually. There's sort of this balance between, legacy and family. And, Frank Lloyd Wright is this amazingly interesting, convoluted, fucked up character. And so it was really fun to write. And that sort of, that was the beginning. We wrote a couple other scripts after that. And, um, we had a little bit of success with the Frank Lloyd Wright thing in terms of getting some attention. We actually got it in front of Robert Redford at one point, and he was going to play Frank Lloyd Wright, and we had some independent financing behind it. And then that was like 2000, 2007, 2008 financial crisis just wiped out any of that like money that people were going to be spending on movies, right? So, it was another couple years after that um, we both went to Dartmouth College, and there's a professor there who had just written a book about Ted Geisel, who is
Hmm.
AKA Dr. Seuss. And, we got an email blast about the fact that he was doing a tour with his book. And we kind of looked at each other and we were like, there have been all these movies about Dr. Seuss's right material. All of his books have been made into these movies. But has anybody ever done a movie about Dr. Seuss? And we're like, no, it hasn't been done yet. And we're like, if this guy has even like half a life, we could totally make a cool movie out of it. And you Wikipedia him and you're like, whoa, it's like where to begin? This guy's got a crazy, crazy life. Um, and so that began this adventure with our Dr. Seuss biopic. And, long story short, that was the one that ended up getting us the attention that started getting us into, the water bottle tour of generals across town. And that sort of started opening up doors to being, real employed screenwriters. And, one of those 100 generals we had after the release of that script was with Mary Coleman, who was the head of Pixar development at the time.
Hmm.
And, we had a great lunch with her. She actually grew up down the street in La Jolla from Dr. Seuss, and she remembers him as this old curmudgeon, like
Wow.
get off my driveway kind of guy. So we kind of bonded over that, and she was like, yeah, we hire one writer a year. We've got nothing for you right now, but we'll put you in the Rolodex. And we're like, okay, great. And sure enough, 6 months later, we got a call from her that was, like, hey, we've got a script that we'd love you to take a look at. And that led to Cars 3 and,
Hmm.
14 months up there working on that movie and being on the Brain Trust and learning how Pixar makes movies and what the whole animation process was like.
Hmm.
Before that, we were never specifically animation guys. We loved all the Pixar stuff and we're fans of animation generally, but it was obviously that experience that kind of solidified us as being writers in the space. And
Hmm.
so when we came back to LA after that, you know, all of a sudden all the people that we had been meeting beforehand on the water bottle tour, we were now meeting with their bosses. And, that led to sort of our whole next stage of our career, which was just being able to write at all those places that you listed off
Yeah,
earlier.
I wanted to ask you, so like when you and your partner were starting off, a lot of your stuff was live action. You said you did a couple of biopics, and then all of a sudden, as we kind of went over in the beginning with all of your the companies you've written for, it's a lot of animation.
Mhm.
So was it hard to transition from writing live action to writing for animation? I mean, especially because Pixar has their own specific way of doing it, I would imagine.
Yeah, so it's not as hard as you'd think. The difference really is more of the process. I mean, even every animation company has a different way of doing it. Like some of
Hmm.
them are still very similar to live action deals where it's like you go in and pitch and you get the job and you go off and write a draft and you come back and you get notes and blah, 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 just like a live action script or most live action scripts. But Pixar specifically Pixar Disney are very different. They're very, we were up there boots on the ground Monday to Thursday, and it would be sitting around with the head of story and a couple story artists and sometimes the whole story room and a couple producers. And it was very collaborative in terms of the story breaking process. And then, we go away and write a scene or sequence, and then that would get handed over to a board artist. And then a week later, you see it up in boards. And, there is nothing more valuable as, a tool for teaching writers what works and what doesn't than to see your work up, literally on the screen a
Hmm.
week after you've written it. Um, and, so that was an education for sure. Um, but in terms of, we never that was our first foray into writing animation. Like we'd never written an animation spec, we'd never done anything like that. And I would say even to this day, we've never written a full animated spec either. It just doesn't really work that way in animation.
I was going to ask, when you're talking about you would submit a scene or a sequence and then you come back and they've already got it storyboarded up. Was there a lot of like, okay, this works, okay, this doesn't work, okay, we're just gonna this, okay, this is not working at all, we're just gonna throw it away. Was there a lot of that, or was it just kind of like all over the place?
Yeah, no, you described it pretty well. It's like there'll be times where you're like, man, I had this really awesome idea, and here it is on the page, and you see it up on its feet, and you're like, that didn't work at all. And other times you're like pleasantly surprised. You're like, oh, that really connected the way that you hoped. But and then I guess the thing I shouldn't skip over is that yeah, there's a whole lot of like, okay, that didn't work at all. That sequence doesn't work. Like we had a great sequence at one point that was like Lightning McQueen in therapy, and like it was
Because
hilarious.
kids
And had
love
all these
therapy scenes.
we had all these therapy jokes. Yeah, it was very like tropey therapy scenes, but with a race car, right?
Uh,
And there were some things we all loved about it, but it was just like, nope, it didn't work. And like
yeah.
that just goes. And so one of the big things that was we were really fortunate with in that year of doing this, year plus, is that you learn not to get attached to stuff.
Mm,
You learn that like here's a scene. We'll see what works. We'll see what doesn't work. We'll be pragmatic about it. We'll learn what we can change and what we can't. And if we have to start over, we start over. And so this idea of like every word out of on the page that's been blood, toil, and earned, like you gotta throw it away. It's one of the biggest lessons that I'm really glad that we had because I think like any writers, starting out, we're always very, you know, this is the way that it should be. This is what we've done. But especially when you have that humbling experience of like seeing that up on the screen and being like, oh yeah, it doesn't work.
oh wow.
Then
Were there ever any times where like maybe they would say, okay, this isn't working, but you would kind of like file it away in the back of your head, and like you would able to maybe tweak it or turn it around a little bit and use it a little later for something different, or maybe even use it for a different script.
maybe, yeah. I mean, I think you're kind of scratching at like where do ideas come from and how do we
Mm,
execute them. And um, I think for sure there are things kicking around in all of our heads that make it out into scenes in different ways. Actively filing something away, being like, well, since we didn't use that here, we can use it here. That never works. And in
mm,
my experience, it's never been like, oh, let me go back to that old scene from that old spec that didn't work and lift that word for word. Like never. Ideas, yes, like a way through something like a bigger sort of umbrella, like this is the way this trope could work, or this is the way this idea might make it through. For sure, that gets recycled all the time.
mhm.
But actual execution of it, nope.
Okay.
Yeah.
I also wanted to ask you because I kind of referenced this when we did the intro that you did the Scooby Doo reboot Scoob with an
Yes.
exclamation point, and I was trying to think why does that sound so familiar, and I realized that I think was like one of the first movies that was supposed to be theatrically released, but then lockdown started, and they said, okay, we're going to put it on streaming,
Right.
and
Yeah,
and
that
so
was
I guess as the writer, what is your reaction to that? Just oh, thank God people are going to get to watch it.
well, that was an interesting experience. We came in on that one late. We were essentially script doctors on that
Mm,
one. And so we were only on that movie for I don't remember, somewhere between 6 and 10 weeks. It was not a huge amount of time, but we got brought in because it was broken and in
mhm,
trouble and halfway into production and needing a whole lot of work. Um, and I won't get into the details of it here, but it was a very, very messy process.
mm,
But good people, like really good people that we worked with, and everybody was it was one of those where everybody's intentions were in the right place. And um, so when it eventually got done and came out, we were I don't know, the whole world was on fire at that
mm.
point. So it was like, all right, well, we weren't so invested in that one that we were like, oh man, we don't get to go to a
And
real
there's no red carpet premiere.
yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not like writers get that much fanfare at those. My experience as a writer on red carpets is there's a red carpet for the talent, and then there's literally the backstop, and then there's a red carpet behind the backstop for the writers.
Writers. Mhm.
So the production did a really good job of like I think they sent us some swag through the mail and like I think we had like a dining like a DoorDash type thing where it's like order yourself some food and enjoy the
It's on
movie.
us. Yeah.
Yeah, it was really like it was one of those. It was actually a bright spot I think in the
Mhm.
pandemic at that point. So
That's
um
that's great. So I also want to ask. So I mean, even though a lot of your stuff lately has been animation, like looking at your website, that you're currently working on another biopic. This one really caught me. A jazz violinist.
Yeah, so that is a long, long, long running passion project. That is about a guy I have known since high school, a good friend of mine, who has this just crazy story about, he was in prison for a while, for sort of a drug bust that he was only minimally culpable in, and this whole story of what it's like to become a man, essentially, a coming of age story amidst prison and amidst the dynamics of prison, and with music at the core of it, and ultimately, music being sort of a way through for him in more than one way. Um, to the point where he got out, and at this point he is an incredible educator, and obviously a world-renowned jazz violinist, and played with Les Paul, every Sunday in New York City before he passed away. And um, it's one of these just amazing stories that anytime you kind of tell the whole story to anybody, they're like, "What? Why is that not a movie?" And I'm like, "Because it's a biopic about a musician, and those aren't easy to get made." But it's definitely a labor of love, and it's Chris Howes is the guy's name, and his brother Lewis Howes is a big name in sort of the um personal growth space, and he's a big advocate of this project, obviously as well, and has a big vested stake in it. So we'll get it. We'll figure it out one of these days. But it's definitely it's one of those, like I said, a labor of love that we've had going for a long time.
Okay. I also wanted to talk to you. Okay, we talked a few times that you work with a writing partner. So
Yes.
what is the process for that? I mean, do you the two of you brainstorm on an idea and then you say, okay, I'm going to go work on this, and you work on that, and then we'll collaborate, or is it a constant working together, back and forth type of thing?
Yeah, great question. Our running joke is, when we agreed to do that first Frank Lloyd Wright biopic together, it was like, all right, who types? You know, so we had no structures set in place. Cut to today, and we have all of our structures in place.
Mhm.
But in a nutshell, we're both sort of idea generators in terms of, like, spec stuff that we're going to do, or if things come to us, then we'll sort of evaluate it independently and then talk about it and decide if it's something we want to engage on. And we have similar tastes, not exact tastes, but like very similar tastes. So I think there's no friction in that process. Usually
Mhm.
it's like we're both sort of attracted to similar types of material, which is super helpful, obviously. And once we get into the actual writing process, it's something where we both sit down and we'll hash out the story together. And that's a whole lot of FaceTime, and generally over Zoom. I live in Hermosa Beach and he lives in Studio City. So
Mm, okay.
we are not, our old joke was that it was easier for us to get together in Emeryville by him taking a plane from Burbank and me taking a plane from LAX. But yeah, so we'll do all the story breaking together, and then once we get to we're very big on outlines and making sure that we have sequence by sequence, at least the curve of the scene, what happens, what the characters want, what are essential character moments, all the things that make a successful scene, without actually executing it. And then once we get to an outline that's pretty robust, then we'll divide. And sometimes we'll divide by a couple sequences at a time if we need to make sure we have the voices of a character in sync, or if we're just trying to make sure we have the tone of the thing in sync. But once we have those things nailed down, then we'll take bigger chunks and sort of alternate and then trade, and obviously note up each other's stuff, and then we'll come back to the table and work through all of those notes, and how we want to get through them. And that part becomes probably the most laborious or challenging, just because again, it's that inherent thing. It's like you put in work to create something in writing, and then you have somebody be like, yeah, it doesn't really work. Like, but it does. So I think the nice thing about that process, though, is that at the end of the day, the best ideas win. It's always it always gets us to a better place by virtue of us having to prove to each other what things will stick and what won't. So so yeah, so then we just kind of keep passing it back and forth and refining it and making sure that everything stitches together. Making sure that everything that, again, everything that we planned out in the outline, making sure that that actually works in execution. We'll stop sometimes too if we get into it and we're like, this isn't working, like what we
Mm.
had conceived of in the outline stage of it doesn't work in execution, or here's a different way through execution wise. What if this happens? And then we obviously have to kind of sync back up to make sure that everything tracks all the way through the rest of the movie.
Okay, that does inspire two other questions. One, I did want to ask you, kind of touched on this earlier. I mean, is there ever any real friction, or is it just kind of like, I think this works, I think it doesn't? And it's just like a lot of nah, 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 nah type of thing.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely real friction sometimes, but we've known each other for 30 years. So there's
Mhm.
never friction where it's like this feels like it could tear us apart. You know what I mean? Like
Mm.
it doesn't get to that level of things, but we're both very passionate guys and we both are very we approach things very intellectually sometimes. And so, I think it's a matter of whatever it takes to make sure that the ideas are being expressed the right way. And I think a lot of times too, it's not like, you can read an execution and be like, well, this doesn't work, but tell me what you were intending to do. You know what I
Mm.
mean? And if you can explain the intention behind it, then we can say, oh, okay, well, here's where this goes awry for me in the execution. And if we adjust this in the execution, then that idea will come through better and everything will work. So,
Okay.
um,
And the other question, feel free to, lie if you have to. Between you and your writing partner, who's the better speller?
the better speller, I probably me, but that's what spell check's for. So,
No.
I think we
Okay.
rely on that as collectively more than anything. But
Okay. Just in case, you get pages back from your partner, it's like, oh my God, there's two O's and lose. Come on.
yeah,
That's not right.
yeah. It's one of those things that like I think I think 20 years ago I was much more of a like every period needs to be in the right place and every sentence needs to have a subject and predicate, and it just doesn't work that way. You know what I mean? I think that, and that to a grander point, screenplays are not, they're never a finished product. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? They're all the thing I think a lot of young screenwriters don't appreciate is that they're not, they are a bridge to another execution of an idea, which is the filmmaking part of it. So like, I'm generally still a proponent of good, solid English and grammar and writing.
Hmm.
But at the same time, like if it works and it gets it across and you have a camera move in there, or you have a capitalization that seems kind of weird in a place, or you have, you know what I mean? Like those things are less important to me than they were maybe
Hmm.
20 years ago because they
Okay.
don't happen so
Awesome. That's great. So part of the reason that I wanted to have you on the show is that you have been very active, especially in the past couple of months, very active on social media. We're connected there, and especially lately, you've been giving out a ton of fantastic advice. Just I think a couple of days ago, you had like it was like a 15 tweet thread about like here's a strategy that you can implement to try and like help you gain access to the industry, and it was a lot different than what you usually see. So I mean, I've one of the best things I see about social media is that it really is a global community, and it helps a lot of writers connect who otherwise wouldn't be able to connect with the other writers. That's definitely been the case for me. That I mean, I am literally connected with writers all over the world, and have
yeah.
been fortunate enough to establish great relationships with them. So, what to you is, I guess, the benefit of being so active on social media and dispensing all this great advice?
Great question. Yeah, I think it was earlier this summer where, I've kind of been on and off Twitter, especially, over the years, and um, the screenwriting community on Twitter. Twitter is such a crazy platform, as you know, and there's so many bad things about it, but there's so many good things about it too. And one of them, I think, is this screenwriting community that is kind of together more than any other platform that I can see in the
Hmm.
numbers that it is. Um, and I think there's a real opportunity to help support one another as screenwriters in that community. And I think one of the things that really jumped out to me is that there's a lot of misconceptions. I think there are a lot of misconceptions about what a career in screenwriting looks like, period, in the world, right? But it gets amplified on screenwriting Twitter. And I think the value that I can bring is, having worked as a working screenwriter for a decade and a half consistently, and working this day and knowing what the fabric of the landscape looks like today. I want to be able to bring that perspective to people who are trying to break in, or whatever stage that they're at. And so a lot of these threads that I'll put out there are, some of them are in reaction to stuff that I've seen out there, and some of them are just things that strike me as I go through my process. And again, like, I don't throw them out there as like these are cardinal rules, like you have to do this. It's like, this is my experience, right? This is what has helped me get to where I am,
Mhm.
and I want to be able to share that perspective with other people, and provide a forum for that as much as I have bandwidth to be able to do it.
Yeah, I was going to say that I think because of your experience in the industry, that adds a certain gravity to what you have to say. Because anybody can go on screenwriting Twitter and just make any kind of statement, but if it's just some guy from rural Iowa, it's not going to have as much weight as it is like
Right.
from someone with your credits and your experience. So I mean, I can see the reactions and comments that are come to your tweets that I'd say a majority of them are very positive and
Ask.
reinforcing. But of course, like with Twitter, there's going to be the negative stuff. So I can't imagine someone's going to call out and say, "Oh, yo, John Stewart, you don't know what you're talking about." But I mean, like, where would that kind of thing come from? You don't have to answer that. But I
Yeah.
mean, what is your reaction to that? Is just it's just it comes with the territory.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I was talking with somebody about this recently. I think especially on Twitter, when you get to a certain level of exposure, that tweet you're mentioning now is like over 100,000 views. And once it gets to that threshold, yeah, you're going to get all kinds of people coming out of the woodwork. And I do think that any of the negativity that comes back is born out of, you know, the natural frustrations that we experience trying to break into an industry that's really, really hard to break into. It's
Hmm.
really, like, almost impossible. And people are looking for rules, and they're looking for ladders to climb, and they're looking for processes that will work, or services that will help them. And I think some of those can be helpful, some of those
Hmm.
aren't. And again, I don't, my biggest belief is that they're the only path to finding your way into a screenwriting career is your path. It is literally up to you to create that. And not that you can't use tools here and there, but anyway, I guess the back to the sort of where the negativity comes from. I think 20 years ago, had I been in the same position, I'd be much more like, "Grr, you're good, good," let's like, and it just, I know at this stage of my life, like, there's no benefit to that, and there's
Hmm.
literally no benefit to amplifying voices that are contentious for no particular reason, or even and sometimes people do have a valid point about things. That the post that I had the other day is not was not meant to be a perfect example of
Hmm.
how you, again, there's no rule. This is just an idea to help people, specifically in the position of having no contacts in the industry
Right.
and not knowing where to start. Well, here's an idea, and here's
Hmm.
a mindset shift too, which is, instead of like, please, please, please read my stuff, like, what value can I offer in order to be a part of the conversation,
Hmm.
and I think that more than anything, it's that mindset shift that will service people down the road too.
Yeah,
So
and I think one of the things I really liked about that thread was that because I made a point of reposting slash quoting it because I thought it was great advice to begin with, but it was also very actionable. that it was easy to do. It wasn't complicated, didn't cost you anything. And it was also just very doable
Right.
that anybody who felt they were ready to try to make inroads into the industry, that they could try these things. Now, of course, there's no guarantee that it's going to pay off, but it gives a writer, I guess, almost gives them hope that, hey, this actually might work for me, as opposed to, like, my recent experience, like someone says, hey, if you give me X thousand number of dollars, I'll guarantee this goes into production. It's like, that ain't going to work, and I
Yeah.
don't have that much money to begin with. But just to give someone a little thing that they can do to help themselves, I think it's very positive reinforcement that, yes, the odds are already against you, but this might help level the playing field for you even just a little bit. And for some writers, that means the world.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think for all of us, it's, as most writers I know are not organically the most outgoing people.
Mm,
You know what I mean? There's a lot of introverts. There's a lot of people who live best, at the typewriter, behind the keyboard, whatever. But you know, 75% of this job is not about that. You know what I mean? 75% of the time that I spend working as a screenwriter is not sitting at my keyboard typing out words. Or if it is, it's emails and communication, or figuring out how um, to frame ideas that I can then pitch to either producers or sometimes my own reps, or development executives, or whatnot. So it really is trying to get people to shift into that mindset that, you know, this is not a game of, oh, I'm going to write a script and sell it and poof, I'm a screenwriter. That
mhm,
just doesn't happen. It just doesn't. 20 years ago, it happened a little bit. Now it doesn't happen. It
mhm.
really doesn't. And that doesn't mean that there's no way to break in either. It just means that people need to be thinking about it in a different way and sharpening different skills along with the screenwriting as well.
Yeah, and as is always the case, everybody's path is going to be different.
Of
What
course.
worked for you, because a lot of people say, "Oh, this is what John did, so I'm going to try that too," and that's no guarantee. They could get very different results from what they're expecting.
No, you can obviously point to some common denominators, which I always try to, even in that thread the other day, try to put foot forward, which is you have to have an excellent piece of material that people read and are like, well, shit, this guy knows what he's doing, or this guy knows what he's doing. You know what I mean? If you don't have that, then, you know, I mean, that's a common denominator. You do have to be able to write.
Yeah, it does
Once
help.
you do, but once you do, that's where it's like, what can you do to make sure that other people know that you can write, you
Mhm,
know? And so I do think that also is a two-pronged set of issues, because I think there are a lot of people who think they're ready to get their material out into
mhm.
the world and are actually not. And that will never work no matter what you do either, or rarely. Sometimes bad material stumbles into success as well. So,
Right, right. Okay, well, that's a great segue. I wanted to ask you, because you also have your website, Narrative Drive, of course, narrativedrive.org. So, from what I could gather, so please feel free to correct me if I'm not hitting the mark here,
yeah.
that it is designed to help writers become better writers.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, this is the narrativedrive.org came out of a lot of mentorship stuff that I've done over the years, and really just trying to yeah, help people who are in a position of um, you know, needing that, already demonstrating great talent, but, needing to learn some more, or having the benefit of some, again, more mentorship along the road. So, it's one of those things that I have run narrativedrive.org sort of in fits and spurts, but have always had, any number of, mentees that I've worked with. And again, I think the idea there is really just to help get some of those voices out into the world in a meaningful way. Um, and in a sense, it's the same sort of mission as what I'm trying to do on Twitter as well, which
Mhm.
is try to offer a perspective that's been helpful to me, offer perspectives based on what I've learned over the years, and try to get that out into the world as much as possible.
And if someone wants to find out more, it is narrativedrive.org. And someone applies, and then what's the process after that?
It is, I would say it's a very loose process. It really depends on my bandwidth at any given time.
Okay.
It's not so formalized a process that, it's like, here's the starting point, here's the ending point. It's really, my busyness as a writer kind of goes in fits and spurts. Also, there are times when I have no bandwidth to do anything but sit behind a keyboard and finish something up.
Mhm.
So I try not to overstretch myself too thin on that. But at the same time, when I do have the bandwidth, I like to be able to step in and help there too.
All right, that's fantastic stuff. So let us start to wrap things up. So you've already dispensed some great advice today, but if someone were to say, John Stewart, what's one rule, or what, not a rule, what's a great takeaway that you want to pass on to writers who are, they want to be better writers. They want to find out, I want to be where John is someday.
I mean, I guess if I had to pinpoint one particular thing, it would just be to continually work that sample, like really make sure like it's not writing, it's rewriting. Be ready to kill some babies, be ready to do whatever you need to do to bend something into the best shape that it possibly can be in, and then be open to figuring out the best way to get that out in the world. It sounds super simple. It's definitely not.
Yeah, yeah.
But
Well,
at the same
and as
time,
we said, there's no one specific path. You've got to
right.
find what works best for you.
Yeah, no, my one of my favorite quotes that I reference often is Steven Soderbergh, who said, "Talent plus perseverance equals luck." So, the two things I always try to advocate are keep working on your craft and don't give up and keep up with it. Like keep going, do something every day, make sure that it's a habit, then, things will happen. I guarantee it.
Nope. Fantastic. What a great guarantee. Okay, so it is Jonathan E. Stewart, and his website is narrativedrive.org. But where can people find you on social media if they want to follow you and also try to start interacting with you?
Yeah, sure. I guess the best would be on Twitter. I think my handle is JESTEW3, I think. Um, but you could also look me up by name too. We'll do
And it's John Stewart, but not that John Stewart.
that.
Okay, John, this has been great stuff. Some fantastic advice, and I love just hearing about your backstory. It's fantastic stuff.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for having me on the show. I really appreciate it, Paul, and definitely don't be a stranger. And look forward to continuing the conversation.
No, fantastic. Okay, audience, if you've enjoyed today's podcast or show, please hit like and subscribe. You can leave a comment and tell your friends, because you can always use followers. You can check out my screenwriting blog, Maximum Z. That's at maximumz.blog. I'm on Twitter, because I'm not calling it the other thing, at maximum_Z. And also, this show has its own Twitter account at podcast CWL, which, of course, Creative Writing Life. I'm also on Instagram at Pez Screenwriting, PEZ Screenwriting. And you can check out my Go Ahead and Ask books on Amazon, the ones about screenwriting and Pi, two very wonderful things. Like you said, that is John. I'm Paul. This has been the Creative Writing Life podcast. Thanks for listening. Stay safe, stay healthy, and most importantly, go write something.